I was folding lavender-scented linens in the stillness of the afternoon, sunlight slanting through the lace curtains just so, dust motes dancing like shy fireflies, when the old transistor radio on the windowsill cracked out Patsy Cline's Crazy. Funny how a single measure of a song can pull you straight through time like thread through a needle. I set the sheet aside, pressed 2 fingers to my lips, and suddenly I was back in 1979, toes on Henry's shoes at the VFW dance, that red dress swirling like a cardinal in winter, and that, dear heart, is when the tug on my chest began again. The same tug that won't let me sleep right to this day. Oh, gracious, before I get carried away, would you be a lamb and, if this little porch chat of mine feels cozy, tap that thumbs up or jot me a comment below. I do read everyone with my morning coffee, and it makes these old stories feel a touch less lonely. Anyway, where was I? Ah yes, the memory. You see, a year has passed since Henry slipped away, mind fogged like a mountain in April, and most days I managed to keep busy, keep breathing, keep the kettle singing. But today that song and the scent of lavender opened a door I thought I'd boarded up for good. There's a room in our basement workshop, a room I didn't know existed until 2 months after the funeral, locked behind a veneer panel Henry must have installed long before his hands began to tremble. I've tried to talk myself out of fussing over it, but mercy, every night it taps at my thoughts like a branch on the window, whispering, "Joanne, you haven't really packed him away, have you?" And so I suppose that's why my bones feel restless this evening, why I've brewed a second pot of tea when one would do, why I'm talking to you now instead of finishing that crossword. I reckon a heart that's loved for 42 years doesn't go quietly just because the preacher says amen. There's more to tell, of course, about the scent of fresh sawdust on the day I found the hidden latch, the way the air inside that space felt cooler, as though keeping secrets drains the warmth right out of a room. But before we venture down those stairs together, bless your patience, let me share who I am so you know whose hand you're holding. I'm Joanne Fitz, was O'Leary before Henry slipped his engineering ring onto my finger in '75. Lived all my 67 years between the Allegheny foothills and these placid Pennsylvania suburbs. I bandaged scraped knees as a pediatric nurse, baked more peach pies than I can count, and lost a little piece of myself when a tiny heartbeat inside me went silent in 1982. Most folks say I keep my chin up, but truth is, some corners of a woman's soul stay dimly lit no matter how bright the porch light burns. That hidden room? It's one of those corners, and I've tried for months to decide whether prying it open was bravery or foolishness. Yet here I am, breath hitching, palms damp, still hearing Patsy croon crazy for trying, because deep down I know that what waits behind that wall is the reason my Henry spent his last lucid nights wandering the basement like a ghost in house slippers. So, darling listener, if you'll sit a spell with me, perhaps pour yourself a cup of chamomile, we'll walk together through that moment when the panel slid back, when the chain pull light flickered on, and when I saw, well, I suppose saying it out loud is the only way to keep my heart from bursting. For now, just know that some memories smell of lavender and old radio static, and they refuse to stay folded in the linen closet. Stay with me, will you? What I uncovered down there still keeps me awake, and by the end you might find yourself wondering what secrets the people you love are hiding in plain sight. I suppose if I'm going to explain why that hidden room rattled my bones the way it did, sugar, I need to carry us all the way back to Turtle Creek, Pennsylvania, summer of '66, when the cicadas sang louder than the television and Mama's clothesline stretched from the walnut tree to the kitchen porch like a tightrope for angels. I was 11, knees sun-browned, heart wide open, certain the world was stitched together with pie crust fluting and hymns from the Methodist choir. Daddy worked double shifts at the Westinghouse plant, came home smelling of machine oil and Wrigley's spearmint, and every evening he'd tap his lunchbox twice on the counter. My secret cue to grab 2 glasses and fill them with cold well water while Mama finished up the supper gravy. Goodness, the rhythm of things felt so solid back then. Biscuits on Sunday, penny candy on Tuesday after piano lessons, Aunt Dolores dropping by unannounced with rumors hotter than July asphalt. On the rare nights the power flickered out, Mama lit a kerosene lamp and read Louisa May Alcott in a voice as soft as quilt batting, and I truly believe life could only ever be gentle, that even storm clouds carried silver linings if you looked patient enough. I kept a red-covered diary under my pillow, the grand scheme scribbled in there, dreaming I'd one day be a traveling nurse on a hospital ship or maybe a singer like Connie Francis, even though my voice cracked worse than the church steps in February. I'd write, "Dear future, please be kind and bring everyone back home safe," because back then I thought kindness was the surest compass and that folks always returned. Then came the autumn of '72, the year the marching band uniforms finally fit me and the Allegheny Hills blazed in colors straight from a crayon box. Henry Fitz showed up to fix the PA system in the gym, toolbox in one hand, calculus book under the other, quiet as a snowfall yet somehow brighter than the bonfire behind the bleachers. We said hardly 3 words that first day, land sakes. I was too busy pretending the mic worked so he'd linger, but that evening my diary held only a single line. Met a boy who listens like he's tuning a radio, and I swear he heard my heart between stations. In those moments I still measured time by school bells, Friday fish fries, and the slow waltz of fireflies under the elm by the creek, never suspecting how fiercely love could anchor a soul, or how loss might one day loosen every nail in the floorboards. Mama used to hum while canning peaches, a low soothing sound that wrapped the kitchen in honeyed calm, and she'd tell me, "Joey girl, the good Lord puts hinges on our days, some swing open, some shut tight, but mercy, each one matters." I filed that away next to the smell of Cedar Hope chests and the thrill of new Mary Janes, certain I'd memorize every hinge before I grew old. If you'd asked that bright-eyed girl whether monsters lurked in plain daylight or whether secrets could hum beneath floor joists like summer cicadas, she'd have laughed and offered you lemonade. Yet, a single lifetime later, I stand here gripping a chipped china cup, knowing now that love and fear can share the very same spoon. Still, I can feel that girl inside me, ponytail swaying, believing the world keeps its promises. Maybe she's the reason I eventually slid back that plywood panel instead of nailing it shut. So come closer, dear heart, and picture those lazy Pennsylvania twilights, the porch swing creaking while Mama's wind chimes traded gossip with the maple leaves, because that gentle hush is where Henry first took my hand, where I first learned the weight of a promise, and where the faintest echo of lavender and sawdust began its long, slow journey toward the secret waiting below our basement stairs. It happened the way summer storms tiptoe in on velvet feet, quiet, then thunder all at once. One sticky Friday in May of '74, when I was 25, hair pinned under a starched student nurse cap and arms full of discharge papers, I popped into Miller's Hardware for picture-hanging nails, and there, bent over the display of soldering irons like a scholar poring over scripture, stood Henry Fitz, home from Pittsburgh Tech with shoulders broader, eyes softer, and a half-smile that somehow remembered every word we'd traded beneath the football stadium bleachers 2 years earlier. Mercy. I felt my pulse leap clear to the roof rafters. He straightened, blinked, and the little brass bell above the door gave a cheery ding that still echoes in my ears. Without thinking I blurted, "Well, I'll be, if it isn't the boy who tunes hearts," and he laughed low, shy, river smooth, holding up a spool of copper wire like a peace offering. He said he'd taken a summer job repairing the township's emergency radio repeaters and asked if I still kept that red dress. The question fluttered through my chest like a meadowlark because it meant he'd carried the memory of our first slow dance longer than I dared hope. That night, under strings of cafe bulbs at the American Legion fish fry, he coaxed me onto the blacktop, pressed a tiny earpiece into my hand, and slipped the other into his own ear so Patsy Cline could croon exclusively for two. Lord. The world beyond that crackling melody disappeared, just lightning bugs, the smell of hush puppies, and his calloused palms steady at my waist. When the song faded, Henry said in a voice that trembled like wet birch leaves, "Joanne, radios can catch signals from a continent away, but you're the only frequency I can't seem to let go." Child, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Instead, I tucked the earpiece into my brassiere, scandalous, I know, and promised to meet him the next evening by the old trolley bridge. What I couldn't explain then, what made my heart trip over itself like a foal learning to run, was the sudden certainty that life had unscrewed a hidden hatch and invited me inside. Up to that moment, my days marched in perfect rows, shift changes, casserole swaps, penny rolls for the church roof fund. But Henry's return spun everything half a shade brighter, half a beat faster, like someone nudged the turntable speed. The very next week he showed up at our porch with a picnic hamper, a battered Polaroid, and that red dress freshly pressed. Mama raised an eyebrow, but handed me her pearl hairpins, and Daddy whistled low. Sign enough, I was free to chase whatever wonder waited beyond the maple trees. Down by Turtle Creek's rusted trestle we spread a quilt, swatted gnats, and spoke of impossible futures, me on a mercy ship patching sailors, him decoding satellite chatter for NASA. Yet every time the shutter clicked I saw a flicker in his gaze, a yearning to trap the moment before time could smudge its edges. Hours later, sun sinking like a peach into molasses, he plucked a wild daisy, twisted the stem round my ring finger, and whispered, "If the world ever steals the sight from me, I'll find a way to keep it safe." I felt silly tears sting my eyes, half from joy, half from some unnamed dread, and I told myself it was only the thick summer humidity. Looking back, I reckon that was the very hinge Mama spoke of, the day kindness met destiny and the doors swung open so wide the hinges groaned. I never guessed the same impulse that made Henry pocket Polaroids would, decades later, drive him to carve a secret room beneath our feet. I only knew my heart beat louder than cicadas and that I wanted whatever future he imagined, come what may. Life has a sly habit of flattening the river just before the rapids, sugar, and by the spring of '82 Henry and I thought we were gliding along smooth as church satin, mortgage paid down to a pleasant hum, my night shifts at Mercy General Steady. Henry promoted to senior radio engineer, and, mercy me, the soft flutter of a heartbeat nestled below my ribs like a secret hymn only we two could hear. I stitched tiny receiving blankets on Mama's old singer, and Henry glued a hand-painted future astronaut sign above a half-assembled crib, each brushstroke coming with promise. Yet deep inside I carried a tremor I never named aloud, a tightness that returned whenever clinic overheads buzzed or the mailman shoved another bill through the slot. Then came June's brutal heat wave, every breath sticky as taffy, and the day started ordinary as oatmeal. Henry off calibrating tower antennas, me sorting pediatric charts, until a stab of pain buckled my knees right there beside the med supply cabinet. I remember the metallic taste of fear, the way fluorescent lights flickered like bad news, and I remember thinking, no, please, not this child. I've kept every rule, swallowed every vitamin. But by dusk the doctor's voice had gone gentle, saying words that fluttered uselessly against the sterile walls, spontaneous, nothing you did, nature's way. They wheeled me past the nursery where pink and blue caps blinked under warm lamps, and I burned with a shame so fierce I wanted to peel my own skin off. Good gracious, I even snapped at Henry, quiet Henry, who stood there gripping the daisy necklace he'd brought for luck, because I could not bear his grief layered on top of mine. We buried the future we'd painted in a tiny section of Holy Trinity Cemetery. Just a brass plaque no bigger than a handshake, and suddenly neighbors who once swapped casserole recipes talked in hushed tones. Church ladies delivered sympathy pies that tasted like pity, and Mama whispered that maybe God wanted us childless for a reason. Each word felt like salt rubbed into fresh bark. Henry withdrew into his workshop, soldering late, radio static leaking through the floorboards like distant ghosts, while I floated through 12-hour shifts, pretending the infant ward didn't howl at my empty arms. Worst of all was Sunday Fellowship Hall, Sister Lorraine's newborn burbling as she asked whether we'd try again, and every head swiveled my way, all smiling encouragement painted over morbid curiosity. Outwardly I nodded polite, but inside a brawl raged between sorrow and anger at my own body, at the fluke of biology, at the polite society that measures womanhood in birth announcements. Nights, I'd lie wakeful, counting ceiling cracks, telling myself I wasn't defective, telling myself kindness should be enough, yet the silence of the cribless corner echoed louder than cicadas. Henry tried, bless him, to coax me back into music and moonlit drives, but even Patsy Cline sounded tinny now, and the more I recoiled, the deeper he burrowed into schematics, chasing perfection with a soldering iron as though precision could mend the jagged tear in our timeline. One stormy evening I found him hunched over a Polaroid of me in the red dress, measuring facial angles with calipers, and instead of asking why, I just backed out of the doorway, ashamed of the resentment bubbling in my chest. Resentment that he seemed to do his grieving while I could only feel mine. That was the seed of our unspoken divide. I feared my softness made me weak, he feared his silence made him distant, and neither of us possessed the courage to name the raw thing thrashing between us. Looking back from this porch, tea cooling in my cup, I wish I'd told him then that sorrow isn't a math problem to solve, and I wish he'd told me that love sometimes builds strange shelters against the storm, because that very night was the first time the basement light burned until dawn, and the faint smell of pine shavings drifted up the stairs like a secret looking for a voice. It was a drizzly Tuesday, the kind where the sky hangs low like a damp quilt, when I finally carried Henry's old tool belt downstairs, meaning only to sort screws from washers and be done. But the basement light kept flickering like a nervous eye, and something in my marrow whispered today was the day. I shuffled past the workbench, patchlet of sawdust meeting the must of cardboard, and there, behind his pegboard of pliers, lay that faint pencil line seam I'd noticed a dozen times yet pretended belonged to settling lumber. Well, child, my breath went ragged as an old porch screen. I pressed my palm flat. The panel gave a soft click, as polite as a library door, and the wall swung inward on hidden hinges Mama always warned me about. Lord have mercy. The air that slithered out was colder than January linoleum. I inched inside, every nerve singing, turn tail, Joe in fits, before the good sense God gave you melts, but pride is a stubborn mule. One dangling bulb buzzed overhead, throwing harsh halos over shelves of radio guts, neatly labeled shoeboxes, yellowing diagrams, every detail so exact it felt like stepping into Henry's mind mid-heartbeat. Then my eyes slid to the center of the room, and time just quit. I swear the Smith Corona wall clock froze at 3:17, the same hour our baby's heartbeat had vanished on the monitor all those years ago. There she sat. No, I sat life-size, knees modestly crossed on a blue vinyl chair, wearing that cardinal red dress from the fish fry dance, pearl hairpins catching the bulb's shiver. face smooth as porcelain yet traced with the tiny laugh lines I never loved in the mirror. My heart lurched so hard my vision popped with silver stars. I thought I'd faint or scream, but the only sound was the rusty thud of the bulb's pull chain swaying. For one wild second, I believed I'd stumbled into a ghost of myself, some terrible wrinkle in time. I reached out, foolish, trembling, touched the doll's cool cheek, and the synthetic skin gave the tiniest yield, like a peach left too long on the sill. I snatched my hand back, whispering, "Henry, what in blue blazes have you done?" My knees buckled. I lowered myself onto a crate of resistors, tears blurring every shape. Shock, yes, pure light-headed horror, but woven through it, a deeper ache almost tender, the aching knowledge that my quiet man had poured the ache of our loss into paint and stuffing and careful stitches. In a battered notebook beside the doll lay Polaroids of me laughing under July fireworks, me dozing with a paperback on my chest, the tiny moments no one but a husband would think to save. Scrawled beneath each photo, his neat engineer's script, "Freeze this before time steals her smile." Another page read, "If the Lord won't turn back clocks, I'll build one that stands still." I covered my mouth, shaking so hard my dentures clicked. All the unspoken sorrow of 42 years, miscarriage, dementious theft. Nights I'd cried into the laundry, welled up and burst like a summer cloud burst. I wasn't angry, not exactly. I was cracked straight through with something heavier, a grief braided with wonder. This was no fetish, no horror show. It was a love letter sculpted in silence, a man's clumsy fistful of sand against the tide. And Lord help me, I felt a fierce, aching tenderness bloom where the terror had been. I whispered, "Oh, Henry, you sweet, foolish boy," and laid my forehead against the doll's cold shoulder, sobbing into fabric that smelled faintly of cedar and his old spice. In that still, humming room, I realized the cruelest thief isn't death, it's time, ever marching, polishing memories thin. Henry had tried to dam the river, and kneeling there, tears dripping onto borrowed satin, I understood something bone deep. Love and fear are twins, and sometimes a heart so afraid of losing builds a shrine that no living I was meant to see. The days that followed felt like walking through a house, after everyone's gone home, the echo of Sunday laughter still hanging in the rafters, but the chairs left upside down on the table. I rose at dawn, brewed Henry's favorite chicory blend out of sheer muscle memory, then stared at 2 steaming cups until one went stone cold, listening to the refrigerator hum like a tired lullaby and wondering if the doll downstairs could feel the chill that slid beneath the door jamb. I didn't rush back to the hidden room. Truth be told, my knees wobbled whenever I passed the basement landing, but the knowledge of her, of me, waiting in that chair tugged at my thoughts the way a tooth works loose. Sore, unavoidable, strangely fascinating. Nights stretched thin as cheap muslin. I'd lie in bed tracking the shadows of maple branches across the ceiling, asking the dark what sort of marriage we'd really had if I never noticed my husband crafting a second version of me beneath our feet. Shame arrived first, sharp, metallic, because surely a wife worth her salt would have sensed the scrape of his chisel, the late-night hammer tap. Then anger trotted in, snorting that I'd been made a fool, turned into a mannequin without consent. But anger requires energy, and grief had wrung me dry. By the third sunrise, only a hollow hush remained, the kind that settles over a snow-covered field where nothing moves but memory. I tried filling the hours, reorganized spice racks, alphabetized every vinyl, even signed up to design the altar flowers, yet color felt muted, cinnamon smelled flat, and choir practice left me blinking back tears between verses. Friends dropped off casseroles again, thinking widowhood had simply circled back for seconds, but I couldn't explain this new weight without sounding unhinged, so I smiled, reheated their kindness, and fed leftovers to the backyard squirrels. One cloudy afternoon, I carried a folding chair to the basement, heart thudding like a loose screen door, and sat across from the doll, studying her lashes, the faint rose tint Henry had brushed onto cheeks that never flushed. I waited for revulsion, for panic, yet what surfaced was a quiet ache, the same ache I'd felt pressing my forehead to Henry's hospital pillow, begging God to ferry him gently across the fog. I realized the doll wasn't a mockery. She was a monument, clumsy perhaps, but chiseled out of devotion and terror in equal measure. Somewhere between the hum of the bulb and the faint scent of cedar shavings, my pulse slowed. I began speaking to Henry as though he stood beside me, telling him the tomato vines were leggy this year. The fillies still couldn't hold a lead. The upstairs faucet finally stopped dripping after I tightened it myself. Little nothings that once filled our breakfast nook. Something loosened in my chest, a knot I'd carried since the miscarriage, since dementia stripped his wit threadbare, since the undertaker shut the casket. I cried, the hushed, shoulder-shaking kind, and the tears tasted less like salt than release. That evening I brewed just 1 cup of chicory and set it on the porch railing, whispering, "This one's yours, hon, but I'll drink mine good and hot." The sky flushed lilac, cicadas warmed up their fiddles, and for the first time in months I felt the earth turning under my feet without tilting. I'm not the girl who believed kindness guaranteed safe returns. I'm a woman who knows love sometimes hides behind plywood, stitched in silk and sorrow. My faith in tidy endings is gone, but a new belief, quieter, sturdier, has taken root, that we keep living with the pieces people leave us, and in tending those pieces we honor both their frailty and our own. So the doll stays where Henry left her, sentinel to a love that tried, failed, and tried again in its own peculiar tongue, while I climb the basement stairs lighter than I descended, carrying a silence that finally feels like peace rather than absence. 2 Saturdays after that basement reckoning, I was deadheading petunias by the mailbox, sun on my shoulders, dirt under my nails the way God intended, when little Gracie Dominguez from 3 doors down bicycled up, cheeks pink as carnation frosting. Waving a homemade flyer, the middle school needed volunteers to judge their very first build-your-own-radio science fair. Now, I could have chuckled and said, "Child, I don't know a transistor from a toaster," but her hopeful eyes were all freckles and faith, and something in my chest gave a soft click, like that hidden panel the day it opened. Land sakes, Henry would have leapt at such a thing. He used to swear children and shortwave static were proof the universe still had surprises left, so I smoothed my apron, swallowed the tremor in my throat, and told Gracie to sign me right up. All week I brushed up on resistor color codes with Henry's dog-eared manuals, their margins filled with his tidy notes and the occasional doodle of my smile, each time I turned a page. The smell of ancient newsprint and machine oil felt less like a ghost and more like a lantern lighting fresh trucks. Come Saturday morning, I marched into the gym, Patsy Cline whispering through borrowed earbuds for courage, and found rows of card tables crowded with bright-eyed youngsters tuning crackling breadboards, sparks of excitement flying thicker than 4th of July Roman candles. One boy in braces explained how his radio could pick up ships in the Great Lakes, while a shy girl named Sasha had coaxed music out of a crystal set, made from a razor blade and pencil lead. Gracious, my heart ballooned right there between the bleachers. I walked table to table jotting notes, hearing Henry's voice in my head, gentle and precise. Ask how they solved the feedback hum, Joe. Compliment their grounding wires. Good grounding matters. By noon the principal declared a recess for lemonade, and that's when Sasha tugged my sleeve, whispered she'd nearly quit after frying her first coil, but pressed on because her granddad once fixed TVs for soldiers overseas. She said she wanted to build things that carried voices farther than fear. Lord, The way that sentence settled in my bones carry voices farther than fear, felt like church bells calling a wayward flock. I excused myself to the hallway, pressed a hand to my heart, and realized the hallway clock marked exactly 1 year since Henry's burial, down to the minute. Instead of cold dread rising, a warmth spread like sunrise across an icy sea. I thought of the doll, silent sentinel beneath our floor, and I knew at last what to do. Keep her? Yes, but also keep the conversation going. That night, I dusted off Henry's ham rig, coaxed its tubes to glow ember orange, and with trembling fingers tapped out my very first CQ call in decades, call sign K3JO, same as the day he registered it for my birthday in '76. Static crackled, then a voice from Ontario answered. Astonished to hear a YL on the band, we talked of auroras and good coffee and how grief sometimes rewires frequency. When I signed off, I swear the doll's eyes seemed softer, as if hearing the distant chatter had eased her vigil. So I've made myself a promise, and you're hearing it now. Every week I'll spin that dial, collect stories like fireflies in a jar, and pass them on here to you, because Henry was right. Bless him. Signals and souls are meant to travel. And even a heart heavy with sorrow can become a lighthouse once more if you honor the static and keep transmitting. Late last Sunday, after finishing my nightly transmission to a hobbyist in Duluth who swears he can hear the northern lights hiss, I shuffled back downstairs with a single candle and stood before the doll, before that quiet altar to yesterday. And something inside me finally unclenched, like an old window after spring thaw. I'd spent months circling grief the way a dog circles grass before sleeping, but in that faint waxy glow I saw the truth I had tiptoed around. It wasn't Henry's secret that winded me most. It was my own long-buried terror that I'd failed him, failed our lost child. Failed the bright-eyed girl who believed goodness guaranteed happy endings. I pressed 2 fingers to the mannequin's cheek, warm now from candlelight, and breathed out a shaky laugh. All right, sugar, I whispered, voice catching, we've both been statues long enough. Then, Lord help me, I did the thing I'd feared. I unpinned the red dress, slid it off those painted shoulders, folded it against my heart, and climbed the stairs, leaving the doll decent in a plain cotton house coat. In the kitchen, I dug through the ironing basket until I found Henry's softest flannel shirt, the blue plaid one he always wore to rake leaves. I carried it downstairs, slipped each stiff arm through a sleeve, buttoned it up, and cinched the hem with a bit of twine. It looked ridiculous, my polished younger self drowning in baggy flannel, but something about the swap felt right, like closing a circuit that had been sparking since 1982. Tears arrived, hot and unstoppable, spilling onto the checkered collar. I cried for the baby whose name we never chose, for decades of polite silence, for every midnight I measured my worth by empty arms. Yet as the tears soaked that shirt, they washed me clean. I understood, finally, that Henry's secret room was never about trapping me in time. It was about offering sanctuary to the parts we each thought unlovable. He preserved my youth because I refused to mourn its passing. I preserved my anger because he refused to voice his pain. We were 2 stubborn radio towers broadcasting on separate vans, both desperate to be heard. Kneeling there, my knees popping like corn, I spoke aloud the confession I'd hoarded. Henry Fitz, I forgive you, and I forgive myself for believing love must always be tidy. The words echoed off plywood and returned lighter, like birds released. I sat a spell on the bottom step, heartbeat thumping in my ears, and let the darkness settle. In that hush, I felt Henry's calloused fingers threading between mine, felt the phantom weight of a baby against my chest, heard Mama humming lullabies made of summer rain and porch swings, and the world exhaled with me, finally. After a long exhale, I reached behind the chair, flipped the master switch, and plunged the workshop into darkness. The shrine had served its purpose. On my way up, I tucked the red dress into a donation box bound for the high school drama club. Let some new dreamer twirl beneath cafeteria lights. Upstairs, dawn peeled the horizon peach gold, and I brewed a single mug of chicory, no second cup staring back accusingly. The steam rose, and with it rose a slender, stubborn hope. I don't know what chapters remain, but I've chosen to meet them with sleeves rolled, garden gloves handy, and a ham radio humming. No regrets, no pretenses, just the steady promise of morning. And if loneliness visits, I'll greet her at the door, pour her tea, and remind her we're still here, still breathing, still brave enough to keep the frequency open. You know, sugar. When I sit out on the porch at dusk and the katydids start up their scratch band chorus, I can't help comparing the woman I was, white-knuckling perfection, believing good behavior was some sort of ticket to painless living, with the woman who's rocking here now, sipping lukewarm chicory and smiling at the fireflies even when they blink out mid-glow. Back then, I thought love was a neat stack of church bulletins and baby announcements. Thought grief could be dodged if you kept your shoes polished and your prayers orderly. These days, I know love is more like shortwave static, crackling, unpredictable, carrying hope across oceans of silence, and grief is simply the toll booth you roll through on your way to deeper tenderness. I used to fret over secrets, terrified they marked a crack in the china, but Henry's hidden room taught me a different arithmetic. Sometimes a secret is just a pocket where somebody stashes their fear until they can find the courage to hand it over. And mercy, handing it over matters less than learning to receive it with steady palms. I also learned that time, ornery old mule, will drag us no matter how hard we dig in our heels. So the trick is to lean with the pole and pick wildflowers along the ditch instead of cussing the mud. I lost years waiting for apologies, waiting for missing children to come back in another form, waiting for the ache in my chest to get polite enough to ignore, and all that waiting was just me refusing to live the days I'd been given. Now, when dawn peels the sky like a ripe peach, I ask myself one gentle question. Joanne, what can you love today without needing to keep it forever? Some mornings it's only the fizz of a fresca or the joke the mailman tells, but that small loving keeps the engine warm. So here's the truth I'm tucking into your pocket. Dear heart, not as a sermon, but as a handwritten recipe smudged with pie filling, the people you cherish will find peculiar ways to say, "Don't forget me," and those ways may look strange, maybe even unsettling, but if you tilt the memory to the light, you'll see the shape of their tenderness shining through. And your own heart? She'll keep changing outfits, nurse scrubs, widow's black, flannel sleeves rolled for garden dirt, yet she's the same brave muscle, still beating out Morse code that says, "Try again." So perhaps it's time you stopped sitting by the window for the phone to ring, or stopped polishing the same regret until you can see your face in it. Maybe it's time to quit waiting for perfect courage and open the panel on whatever secret room you've boarded up. Sweep the sawdust, flip the switch, and let a little honest lights fill in. Because if an old gal like me can find mercy in a mannequin's painted smile and spin it into new conversations clear across the northern sky, then Lord knows you can stitch your own ache into something that hums. And wouldn't it be a shame, sweet listener, for your story to rust silent while you're busy expecting tidy endings? Go on, pick up the mic, plant the seed, send the letter, forgive the misstep, whatever breathes life into that lump of hope rattling around your ribcage. Maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop waiting and start transmitting. Well, look at us, darling listener, me rocking on this creaky porch swing with the crickets keeping lousy time, you somewhere out there behind a little glowing screen, and between us a ribbon of invisible static carrying every sigh, every laugh, every jittery heartbeat of the tale I just poured out like sweet tea on a summer night. I reckon if you've stuck around this long, you understand why I believe stories are living things and why I keep telling mine even when my voice wobbles. But before we part, tuck your feet up a moment and let me ask you plain. Do you think true love is supposed to find its way back, no matter how many detours and detours of detours it takes? Or does the real miracle lie in loving once and letting go with grace? I've been spinning that question like a penny on a tabletop ever since I turned off the workshop light, because some evenings, especially the misty ones when the moon is just a thumbprint, I swear I can feel Henry sitting beside the mannequin in that borrowed flannel, humming along to the hiss of my ham radio, as if dimension never stole the map of his memories and he's simply waiting for me to finish my shift and come home. And other nights I'm convinced the greatest proof of love is that he let his body rest after fighting so hard, trusting that I'd learn to steer my own lonely ship. Both truths flutter inside me like 2 pages of the same hymn book, and maybe the answer is that love circles back in one form only when we release it in another, like radio waves bounced off the ionosphere returning as a hushed echo. So, I'll keep the frequency open, keep the spare rocking chair ready, and if you ever pass through Turtle Creek, you're welcome to knock for a cup of chicory and a peek at the doll who started this whole confession. Just promise to bring a story of your own, because the porch boards love new footsteps. And if this ramble brushed even the tiniest dust speck of recognition off your heart, if you've got a secret room you've been meaning to open or a bittersweet keepsake you're finally ready to set free, won't you jot me a note in the comments below? A simple "I hear you, Joe" does wonders when the kettle whistles lonely at midnight, and Lord knows it keeps my arthritic fingers limber scrolling through your kindness. Hit that little subscribe bell too, if you're of a mind. It tickles me something fierce to imagine our small circle growing every time my wrinkles pop up on somebody's homepage. But mostly, share your take. Should true love return like a homing pigeon? Or is the braver act to wave goodbye and trust the sky? I can't promise answers, but I'll read every word with the same care Henry gave those Polaroids, and together we'll keep the conversation humming long after the porch light clicks off. For now, I'll leave you with this half-whispered notion. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the basement floorboards settle just so, I think I hear his toolbox lid creak, like he's fussing with one last adjustment, making sure the signal's clear. And in those instants, even with the empty chair rocking in the breeze, I don't feel quite so alone. Maybe he remembers. Maybe remembering is another name for forever. Good night, sugar. Keep your heart tuned and let me know, does true love really come back, or do we carry it forward in every brave new step we take?